Great, it's a pleasure to be
Thanks
able to
for
present to you today. Sorry, there's a slight delay. Not sure if we're both talking at the same time there, but yeah, there'll be two of us presenting today, and I'll just hand over to Stu to talk first.
Thanks, Matt. We choreographed all that well. So, hi everyone, and thanks for joining on what I guess is your coffee break, virtual coffee break between sessions.
Hi, Matt. I think maybe there's some connection.
We may have lost Stu temporarily. So my apologies for that. Stu will rejoin us, and we might just switch to me sharing my... Oh, hi, Stu.
Oh.
I think a bit of delay when you were speaking there. We didn't quite get the audio through, so maybe I'll share my screen. Maybe that'll free up your bandwidth a bit. You're muted, by the way, Stu.
Okay. How are we doing?
You're back. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah,
I'm not sure if the bandwidth is... Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. So what I was just about to say, maybe you didn't get it, was apart from thanks for joining, I just wanted to say that we're about to just go in and look at a few of our AI-enabled assessments and talk through how the AI helps us to maintain a consistent standard of assessment. And it's that which allows us to align with confidence to other common referencing standards like CEFR. As we said before, there will be time for questions at the end, we hope. But do feel free to chat us, and one of us will pick it up as we go. So the first thing to say on the next slide is that we've been involved. Yeah, so we've been involved in English language education for a long time, and I guess many of you will know us as, perhaps more as a publisher than for assessment necessarily, but actually we're the largest educational assessment company in the world. And we do something like, I'm told, 150 million tests every year globally. And over half of those are digital, which means they're delivered on screen or they're delivered online. And when it comes to English, what we're doing is we're trying to bring together that expertise and that heritage we have around teaching and pedagogy, bring that together with the publishing side, as well as the testing capabilities that we have. And we think that if we do that effectively, we're going to have a more holistic approach to language learning. And what I guess put simply it means is that we're able to bring together our courseware business, and it can speak to our assessment business, and our assessments can speak to our courseware, and that allows for a seamless movement between the two for teachers and learners, which we believe ultimately is going to help people to learn English better. One of the ways we do that is through a common standard. So we use something called the Global Scale of English, or the GSE, which is based on CEFR. It's actually an expanded version of the CEFR can-do statements, where we've assigned specific ranked values to the performance descriptors. And that helps us to better measure proficiency, and especially to measure movement in language gain in a more granular way than if you're just looking at or thinking in terms of CEFR bands or CEFR half bands. It's hard to see in the band where you are and what you need to do next to progress. One of the things that's a little bit different about our assessments is that they all use AI to provide the scoring. So whichever skill that you're looking to assess, we're using a combination of advanced writing and speech recognition tools we're using natural language processing to score those tests. That's not to say that humans are not involved. They are involved. The scoring engine is trained by humans. The statistical models are validated by human experts, but the scoring itself is 100% automated process, even for speaking. And there are several benefits to highlight around that. The first is that it allows for a reliable and a consistent scoring system. And what do I mean? If you've got the example up there, just a second.
Go next slide.
Hang on, I'm just trying to see which slide you're on. Yeah, next slide, please. Thanks. Yeah, great. So what it does is it allows us for a reliable and a consistent scoring system. So if you look at that example there, you've got two different test takers and two different examiners. And both test takers are asked the same question, and both are giving the same response in terms of what they say and how they say it. However, the first interviewer marks it as average, and the second interviewer feels that it's a great answer. And in that example, not only does one or both of the students get graded unfairly, it means that the two scores that the institution has are not comparable. And obviously that's a real challenge that you have with human marking, ensuring standardization across your markers, ensuring a consistent approach to a marking rubric, making sure that all of the available marks within a mark scheme are actually utilized. It's actually pretty difficult to do. Humans are not very good at this in terms of maintaining consistency, reaching consensus. And AI takes that problem away. So if you go to the next slide, please, Matt. Thanks. Here you can see in the same situation, a trained scoring engine, which has an objective view, is simply applying a model, which leads to an unbiased and a consistent result and allows you to have comparable scores, comparable results across a cohort. The second thing to flag around the AI testing system is the accuracy. So, how do we go about actually building these tests? Well, we train a scoring engine by collecting thousands and thousands of test item responses. And we use as wide a demographic as we possibly can. So we'll be looking at a mix of ages, a mix of genders, a mix of countries, a mix of dialects, and we'll be doing that across native and non-native speaker populations. Then what we do is we use the technology to decompose those responses into discrete data points and values. So that might be phonemes, it might be syntax, vocabulary, but a range of different data points from spoken and written production. At the same time, we have a team of expert human raters who will be analyzing those item responses and assigning a rating based on an established scoring criteria. And then what we do is we use the data points to identify which statistical model or which algorithm best predicts the human ratings for those items. And it works really, really well. It allows us to then, once we've validated the model, to input any number of new responses to those items, whether they're spoken or written, and score them automatically without the human intervention. The average machine to human correlation for these tests, and I'm talking on average across all the different tests that we use AI for, is about 0.98, where 1 is like a perfect match. perfect match to how the human rated that item on average. So a pretty high degree of accuracy. The third point to flag on the next slide is about scalability and speed, I'd add. So when you have human rated tests, you can only scale to however many raters you have available. That might be how many people you have in your HR, it could be how many people in your admissions team, and then you have to schedule and you have to score. And that all takes time and adds cost. With the auto-score test model, you obviously get results very, very fast. And in some cases, it's minutes from test completion. But I guess what's equally important is that you have no limitation on your scale. So whether it's 10 test takers or 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, whether they're in one campus or across a country, there are very few limitations with this. The technology can handle and process it. The limitations tend to come from how customers want to use the tests. So they may have certain people they want to test at certain times, in certain places, under certain conditions. And that's fine, but the technology itself doesn't have those limitations. So that's a bit about the AI. And then could you just skip over to the next slide? Thanks, Matt. What I wanted to do is just kind of share how we think about that in terms of the assessments themselves. So how do you go about choosing which assessment is best fit for your learner's needs? And it seems like an obvious question, but it's something that comes up a lot. All these tests, do the same thing. They all measure English. So what's the difference? How do you pick the right one for your need? And what we have come across quite often is tests being used in ways that they weren't actually designed to be used. So for example, you might have a test taker that's doing repeat testing every few months on what we would classify as a certificated test or a high stakes test, where the need just may not be there, and they're spending a lot of money to do it, to be tested in this way. But actually the need is really just to know where they are in their learning journey and what kind of interventions and support teachers can put in place. Likewise, you often, I would say often, but I have seen examples where, pretty simple placement tests, which have reporting that's, in quite wide bands, are not being used for placement. They're being used for exit testing to sort of validate that someone's reached a certain level. So it's really important to understand what the test purpose is and how that matches to the need of your test taker population. We look at it in 4 buckets, broadly speaking. So we have place, where it's simply about putting the learner into the Monday class, the Tuesday class, the beginner class, the advanced class, and giving a little bit of insight to the instructor as to what are the first steps, what are your 3 first moves with that learner to help them to learn. And it's not that much more information that's required when you're placing someone. When you're talking about benchmark testing, you're really thinking about the difference between point A and point B. Has someone made measurable, demonstrable progress? And how do I help the intervention in that assessment cycle? So you need more information, more insights, and a more granular view of performance on a test. Certify is when we're starting to think about high stakes testing. We're starting to think about levels of control and security, because learners or candidates are having to prove to a third party, to another stakeholder, prove their level of proficiency, prove that they've achieved a certain point of proficiency. And verify is a little similar, I guess, but this is sort of like the highest of high stakes, and Matt's going to talk a bit about this in a moment. And this is where the outcomes of achieving that that level of proficiency can be hugely impactful. You may have visas depending on it. You may have settlement depending on it. You may have overseas degrees depending on it. So the stakes become high. And what you see across that trajectory, across those 4 buckets, is 2 things. One, the level of control and security required increases. And then related to that, the cost increases. And often it's the cost of providing that level of control that contributes to the rising cost. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Matt. We have lots of different assessments, and these are those. I'd say almost all of these, but in fact all of them bar one, use AI to score all of the skills. Some of those tests are looking at specific language domains. So, we have speaking tests that they're only measuring speaking primarily. And then we have other tests that are more integrated 4 skills tests. But we don't just think about them in terms of those 4 buckets or that journey to proficiency. We're also considering who the learners are and where they are studying. Where are they in their cycle of language acquisition? And when they're in an education setting, there are certain tests that are more appropriate than others. I'm going to talk in a moment about Pearson, which is, as you can see in the bottom corner there, a really flexible suite of assessments that work well in education, but they work equally well outside of education spaces. So they're used a lot in corporate segments and government or public sector as well. Next slide, please, Matt. So a bit about Pearson, and the reason I'm kind of picking on Pearson is just because it's sort of been the cookie cutter for automated language testing. The cookie cutter, I would say, not just within Pearson, and we've modeled a lot of our test development on the Pearson model. But I think for the whole industry itself, for automated language testing, it was the first. And it's been around for about 20 years in a variety of fashions. But what it does fundamentally is it measures the facility in spoken and written production. So the extent to which somebody can understand spoken and written English and then reproduce, respond intelligibly in that target language at a native-like pace. And what makes it high flex is that it's available in a range of different modalities. So you can do it on site, you can do it off site, you can do it online or offline, you can do it on a mobile phone. This year we've added a remote monitoring feature as well. So there's going to be many institutions, and probably some of them amongst you here, who've been disrupted this year in the way that they approach testing, whether that's for recruitment or for exit testing, and they require certain levels of control that they can't otherwise access because of the COVID disruption. So remote monitoring is a kind of a good medium control solution there. The tests are available in a range of different times and looking at different skill areas. So as I mentioned, we've got a speaking test that's discrete, measuring listening and spoken production. The same for reading and writing. But we also have these integrated 4 skills tests like the English placement test and our new business English test, which is just launching, called the Pearson Professional English Test. Next slide, please, Matt. Thank you. So this is just to give you a snapshot of what the reports look like. They are aligned to CEFR. They report primarily on the global scale of English, which is that granular numeric scale I mentioned, but it is very, very closely aligned to CEFR. So you see a GSE score in this example, or an overall proficiency score of 48, and that corresponds to the B1 band. When you look at how we visualize that across those 4 skills for this particular test, you can see discrete skill scores but you can also see the overall band, CEFR band that's sitting in. You get a very detailed description of overall performance in the test, but you also get the same for each of those discrete skills in a way that would be very hard for a human to readily capture and report back on. This becomes particularly true when you take the one skills test and we're measuring those foundational skills like pronunciation or fluency or intelligibility. And what you also get that the data and that the AI engine allows us to do is to identify where the areas for improvement are. So whether you are the learner or whether you're a teacher of the learner, you can very quickly see what areas you should concentrate on next to help improve that particular language domain. And each of those is, again, CEFR aligned. Apologies, it's not too easy to see when it's shrunk. Next slide, Matt. And the last thing I'll say before handing over is that, the test has been around for a while in various formats. So we have a strong evidence base and a customer base. It's used a lot in institutions globally, but multinationals do use this a lot, particularly the one skills test. So if you're in an industry where you have high customer contact, like BPO or maybe not right now, but the airline industry, these tests are used as screeners. They're used as part of the recruitment funnel, and they're measured as part of learning and development processes. And finally, Versant is used quite a bit in the public sector. One of the areas that it's most commonly used for is to help set policy